The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Ontario students missed out on a lot during this pandemic. Would reinstating grade 13 help them make up for lost time? We'll test out that hypothesis tonight. Then, astrophysicist Sara Seager is with us on her search for life on other planets and new life after tragedy here on Earth. It's Tuesday, February 8th, and that's next on the agenda. Ontario students were out of their classrooms longer than any other kids in the country. It's led parents and some experts to worry about learning loss and whether those students can catch up. For most of the 20th century, high school in Ontario was 5 years. It only went down to 4 in 2003. So here's the thought: could bringing back that 5th year help? Let's consider that with, in Paris, France, Kelly Gallagher-Mackay, assistant professor and program coordinator of law and society at Laurier University. She's currently abroad working with UNESCO. In Kingston, Ontario, Heather Stewart, the Bell Canada Mental Health and Anti-Stigma Research Chair and professor at Queen's University. And in the provincial capital, in South Etobicoke, Tony Pontus, executive director at the Council of Ontario Directors of Education. In Don Mills, Karen Littlewood, President and CEO of the OSSTF, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. And in Seton Village, Annie Kidder, Executive Director and a founder of People for Education. And we are delighted to have the cast of Ben-Hur with us here tonight on TVO. So nice to have so many different voices from the education world. I want to just start with the very basic question. Annie, to you first. Do we need grade 13 back?
No, we need a lot of other things. We could and should be doing much more. We definitely need a plan and a vision, but grade 13 specifically isn't the answer to all that ails us right now.
Kelly, how about to you?
Same answer. Really glad to hear us talking about what it's going to take to support students to recover and to rebuild our education system. But grade 13 is expensive and doesn't happen at the time that lets us bend the curve for students.
Karen Littlewood.
I'll jump on that same bandwagon. We don't necessarily need to go back in time. I think if we could, that would be great, but we're not doing that. We need to do something that's going to address the needs and the learning gaps that have happened now. We need something that will destigmatize students reaching out for more supports, and we need something that's equitable.
Heather Stewart.
Well, I'm going to be the lone voice perhaps that says, yes, I would like to see grade 13 come back. I'm looking at it from the vantage point of post-secondary institutions, not necessarily what needs to happen in the secondary school system. And I think that one extra year of maturity would help them deal with the stress, deal with the drinking culture in post-secondary institutions much better.
Tony Pontus.
Interesting. Heather, you are the lone wolf here. I, too, would not agree that returning to grade 13 would help. Certainly, it would not help the student in grade 1 who's now falling a bit behind in their reading. It would require at least 4,000, perhaps more teachers, and we can't find enough teachers as it is now. So I agree, we need a plan. We need to focus on the children that really need the help now and not think about grade 13.
All right, let me do a follow-up second round of questions because Tony raised the interesting issue of how would it help the student in grade 1 today. What if we were to say we're only going to bring it back temporarily to deal with the fact that the kids who are in high school now definitely did not get the same education as those of 5 and 10 years ago? So how about on a temporary basis? Tony, can we get you to a yes on that?
No, you can't, sorry, because it still doesn't answer the question of how do we help them now? I don't want to wait 12 years for that grade 1 student to receive that additional assistance. We can find ways, as Annie said, if we can come up with a plan, and we should be able to help students now in many different ways to help with their issues and their needs right now.
Kelly, what if we were to bring grade 13 back for just 3 or 4 years, just to deal with those who are in high school now who've definitely not had the same education as those of years ago? Would you be in favor of that?
No, I still wouldn't. I think that, we don't have a lot of data in Ontario. The international data that we have says that a couple of key findings: one, youngest kids are having the hardest time. Two, kids who are already facing various kinds of disadvantage are having the hardest time. If we're going to put big resources into figuring out a strategy to support kids through this process, and some of them will be in high school, then I don't think that we need to bring grade 13 back. I have kids that age, and my son would have been horrified. And let's forget that about 20% of kids already do a victory lap year when they need another credit, when they need their marks to grow up. So it's there for those who want it. We don't kick kids out right after grade 12. It's a very normal part of our system already.
Can I just briefly understand, Kelly, what you meant when you said your kid would be horrified at the notion of having to do grade 13? Is it that they're so anxious to get out of high school and off to post-secondary? Is that part of it?
I think so. High school hasn't been great. It's true. The last couple years have been really hard for all the kids. And I think that the sense of normalcy moving forward, whether that's into college or trades or university, even into work, kids are keen to try and get that under their belt.
All right, Karen, I'm going to confess to being just partially surprised by your first answer, because after all, if grade 13 were brought back, that's thousands of more jobs for secondary school teachers, and what leader of a secondary school teachers union would be opposed to that? So help me understand your thinking on this.
Well, for sure. I'm not opposed to more jobs. I would fall more in line with your second question and answer it by saying, yes, perhaps something on a temporary basis. We have to identify where the needs are. And we have a whole education team that will be able to do that, to look at where the mental health needs are. We should be talking to attendance counselors. We have to look at the whole system. And I have to admit, when Kelly said her son would be horrified, that really struck me, because that's exactly what I said in my open, is we shouldn't be stigmatizing this. It should be something where students go back to meet the needs. Not everybody's going to need to, but they're going to be more. Kids in grade 11 right now are the last ones who had a regular experience at high school. And I think high school is really an important part of your social emotional well-being. We shouldn't be running away from it. We should be saying, I need to get everything I can out of this before I move on to the adult world.
Okay, Annie, I think I know how you're going to answer this, but, duty compels me to ask you the question anyway. How about those who are in, say, grade 11 or 12 right now? Could you imagine bringing grade 13 back just for them, just temporarily?
I think there's a solution that's not grade 13 per se, but which it actually has to do with money. So Kelly's right. You can take another year. You can take more credits if you want, but there's a penalty eventually. So a kid taking anything more than 34 credits, you need 30 to graduate. School boards don't get as much money for them, to put it really, really crassly. So if we want to destigmatize, if we want to say, you know what, you've had a very hard high school experience, you are totally welcome to come back. We also have to make sure that boards get full funding for those students. So it's not necessarily grade 13, but it is absolutely the option of another year to set you up better, to play some catch up, maybe improve some marks and set you up better for whatever you're choosing to do next. But there is a financial issue here, which is not just about hiring more teachers, which is that kids who are taking more than 34 credits, boards actually get $2,000 less per student. I hope this is right. Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, for those kids. So there's a funding issue that has to be faced.
Okay, Tony, I'll go to you just to confirm Annie's figures.
Sure. Yes, it is a significant decrease in funding. Now, fair to say there are very few students who have 34 credits and then return, but there are a few, and I think that would be an easy fix, eliminate that penalty altogether. But if I can also add that there are other ways to help those students in grade 11 and 12 to strengthen their deficiencies. And I hate that word. I hate the word learning loss. It's rather about taking kids where they are. But there are strategies called credit completion and credit recovery, where students, if they've missed a unit in grade 11 math, they shouldn't have to repeat the whole course. why not let them get some assistance in that particular unit? Once they've achieved that unit, they get the credit. So there are many strategies that we could apply right now. And we haven't even talked about social workers, psychologists, child and youth workers. I think we need those as much as we need teachers.
Well, I will take Tony's admonition to heart, and let's go there right now. And to that end, I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up this chart here at the top of page 2. Thank you, Sheldon. And for those listening on podcast, I'll just describe what we're seeing here. Canadians experiencing depression and anxiety. And this tracks it with 2 lines going across a chart from April of 2020, essentially the second month of COVID, to December of 2021, not too long ago. And the numbers at the beginning shoot right up and then continue to go up with, I guess, a bit of a dip in last summer, where anxiety and depression levels might have dipped a bit, but now we're sort of back into it again. And Heather, I guess I'll bring you in at this point and say, if this is what the general population is experiencing, can we assume it's even more so for those who are in high school?
I would speculate yes, because they're dealing with the online learning and being at home, being away from their friends. I think that's got to be stressful for them, also for their parents. So I think that we don't have the data, but I think the trend would be similar if we looked at high school students.
Given your perch in the post-secondary world, where you're dealing with, let's say, first and second years who've had to deal with COVID during their high school careers, what do you think about the level of emotional and academic preparedness that they're demonstrating in the post-secondary world that you inhabit?
Well, I mean, we know that the students that are coming into first year, this is a transition year for them. And a lot of them have a lot of stress around being away from home, being independent, trying to manage their lives, trying to do their shopping, trying to cook their meals. And then they're in a very competitive environment. So in high school, they may have been used to getting very high grades and standing out in their classes. In university or post-secondary institutions, they might just be part of the norm. And some students find it very difficult. They don't really have great study skills, and sometimes they just can't buckle down. They get stressed out. Universities are being overwhelmed with students having mental health problems these days. We can't keep up. The waiting lists are so long. We have drinking going on in many of the post-secondary institutions to excessive amounts, street parties where kids are getting into trouble. We're trying to manage this at the tail end, and I'm wondering, is there something more we could be doing in secondary schools to prepare the kids who are going to the post-secondary institutions? Perhaps a hiatus year, a grade 13 type year, or an extra year that's focusing on some of the skill development would be a way to help ease that transition. And the worry that I have is that when students go to mental health counselors or disability counselors, they often get labeled, and those labels can follow them around for a long, long time, and they do have important psychosocial implications for those students. So, we want to do upstream things and try to prevent this kind of stress, try to prevent the drinking, try to prevent the inability to feel that they've transitioned smoothly into post-secondary institutions.
Kelly, what's your impression from your perch in the post-secondary world as to whether, because of COVID, we're not talking about other sort of typical things that the system deals with, but because of COVID, whether students are even more academically and or emotionally ill-prepared for the post-secondary world?
Well, Socrates is famous for saying the kids today are nothing like the kids in my time. And I do think there's always a certain tendency to look at young people and not see as many of the strengths as the lack of preparedness. It's hard to tell. It's been such a wonky 2 years, and that wonkiness has been as true in the post-secondary system as it has been in the K-12 system. So yeah, I think there have been differences in terms of students' learning and work habits. I think the problems of social isolation have been probably even worse for students entering post-secondary in the last 2 years, whether that be college or university. But is it because they didn't spend enough time in high school? I cannot answer that question.
Okay, Annie Kidder can. Come on in, Annie.
Oh, no, I think, and I'm going to change the subject here a bit, but I think that all of this conversation we're having right now, the problem with all of this conversation is that we don't actually know. We just did a pan-Canadian scan of education sort of policies and strategies in provinces and territories connected to the impact of the pandemic. And it was really shocking in that few provinces and territories had kind of overall visions, big plans for research and assessment to understand where and how kids were. Ontario was definitely one that didn't. So we're ending up, I'm not trying to dismiss this conversation. It's an incredibly important one, and Kelly has talked about this a lot, but what we're missing right now is a real understanding. We're missing maybe we don't need another grade of high school, but definitely in schools right now, we need the time and the staff, and Tony's right, the social workers, child and youth workers, graduation coaches, credit recovery teachers, people in elementary school supporting kids. But we need to understand where they are now in order to understand what are the other things that should be happening. So I think that for me and for our organization in the last couple of weeks, we've really been shocked by when we looked really, really hard. What we couldn't find we found very few real kind of visions for recovery and renewal, and visions based on, okay, we know we've got to do the research, we know we need the data. So I think that there are things needed, and time is one of them, more support is one of them, but there's probably not going to be one nice easy fix like let's just add another year to high school. But we definitely need to do something, because I think, like all of us, there has been a level of anxiety for everybody, but for kids in school, for young kids, older kids, it's a big 2 years is a lot of their life, and it's a lot of stuff to miss. But that, sorry, I'm ranting now, but that's the issue that we're not really addressing.
We always enjoy your rants, Annie. That's A-okay.
I'm sorry.
No, but I do want to ask Karen, I'm sure you get lots of feedback from your secondary school teachers, and I wonder whether they're saying to you, Karen, we are graduating these kids and we are sending them up to university and college, but they're not as prepared emotionally to handle it as, say, kids of 5 years ago before COVID. How much of that do you hear?
Your crystal ball is correct. I do hear that. I hear that from people. We have a number of people who were working at the time that there was a grade 13 and could see the difference. In OSSTF, we have people working in the university sector, and they tell us that there's a difference. So that's obvious. What we need to focus on right now is not shortchanging the students of Ontario. $1.6 billion was put into individual parents' pockets over the course of the pandemic, and that's not a global way to address the situation. You address the situation by putting money in the system, by putting the supports in the system. Absolutely. The child and youth workers, the mental health workers, the psychologists and psych associates, all of them play a really important part of the team, the custodians and the secretaries. We have to be looking at rebuilding, strengthening Ontario as we head out of the pandemic, and I certainly hope we're heading out of the pandemic. It's not going to be a simple answer. It's not probably going to be a permanent solution, but there might have to be something different in place for the next couple of years to address what students need in Ontario.
Tony, can I get you to weigh in on that as well?
Sure, and just to piggyback on that, I think that the plan needs to be short-term and long-term. So we need short-term additional support for young children in the primary grades to help them move their reading capabilities up. We need additional supports in grades 7 and 8 to help those students transition to secondary schools, because we're hearing that's a difficulty. We need additional resources in grade 9 and 10, because we know that if students start to fall behind in their credit accumulation by grade 10, we call it 16 by 16, we know that they're less likely to graduate. And then we also need to help those students in grade 11 and 12 who are about to exit. And by the way, remember that not all students go to college or university. We'd like more of them to go into the skilled trades. We know that a number of them go into the world of work and then hopefully come back to further education. So we need those short-term supports now, as well as all the mental health supports that everyone has described. And while we're doing that, we need to then look at a longer-term plan.
I think it's fair to say that this government has really drawn a great deal of attention to the skilled trades and has tried to make the case, as Tony just did, that post-secondary is not the only option for you after you finish high school. The skilled trades are a great way to make a great living and to have the kind of job security that a lot of other people in society don't have. However, having said that, I wonder whether the government is listening as carefully to these other ideas that you have all brought forward during the course of our discussion here. Yes. And I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking right now. Okay, go ahead. Karen, you start us off there. Are they listening to these other ideas as much?
We were talking about the 34 credits in early December with the government. There's no reaction, there's no response, there's no acknowledgement of what we need to do to be addressing the situation. We hear that maybe license stickers aren't going to be on license plates anymore, which, that shouldn't be the focus right now. We have to question too, where's the money going to go that would come from that? We have to look at the money that's going into education, and consultation is really important. We are working directly in education. We're not saying that we need to, say grade 13 is back forever and ever. We're looking at what we need to do to address the needs of the students. So it would be great if we could be involved in those conversations at a higher level. Yeah,
Kelly, I'm trying to rack the recesses of my memory from the last Ontario budget, but I think foregoing renewal of license plate stickers could potentially deprive the Treasury of about $1 billion. Can you think of what you might want to do in terms of education with $1 billion?
Well, we just have Laurier's Center for Leading Research in Education called If I Had $1.08 billion, which is about how much we would have to spend on education recovery if we followed the UK's example. Instead, we spent $72 million, most of it on short-term online summer school in Ontario. And that's just marginally more than we spent on cleaning supplies in this year's budget for learning recovery. So I think $1 billion, there were a lot of ideas around the table because we had all the stakeholders together. I'd sure like to see some kind of similar group come together. Personally, I put a lot of work and energy into looking at the potential for tutoring within the public school system, one-to-one support for students who've fallen behind academically. I think there's a tremendous potential there. And I would love to see a youth corps where we bring young people, recent university and college graduates into our schools in a range of roles to help free up teachers, to help teachers meet some of the demands they're facing, and to give those students an exciting first step into the very rewarding career that is education.
Tony, do I infer correctly from your perch as Executive Director of the Council of Ontario Directors of Education that you do have occasional and/or regular meetings with the Minister of Education?
We do. We have bi-weekly meetings with the ministry staff. However, those are not consultation meetings. Those are more problem solving and operational in context. So I know Annie has argued, and I agree with her, that there needs to be some kind of a advisory stakeholder group that would involve everyone involved in education, including parents, that would allow us to provide input into the government. We recognize that when you provide input, there's no guarantee it'll be taken, but at this point, it's not being sought.
But to the best of your knowledge, are any of the ideas that you've all put forward today, improved tutoring, improved guidance, all of the other supports that have been referenced already, is any of that under consideration at Queen's Park?
In fairness, some of that was already provided in the summer budget. And so there were additional supports, both for mental health and for academics. But I think there's much further to go. There's much more that could be done. But in fairness, some of that was supported over in this previous summer. And I'm assuming also in this summer to come.
Annie, could you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think what's missing is a comprehensive plan. So Kelly's right. Everybody has said the short term, or Tony said short term and long term. So what we don't have is everybody at the table, all the experts, all the people with experience, students especially, people from health and education, people experts in mental health. We're in a moment right now in Ontario and in Canada where we really, this is urgent. I would call it an emergency. And we need everybody at the table to provide the best advice possible. Yes, government doesn't always listen to the advice, but it's understanding the urgency of the situation. So when we looked at, the situation across Canada, we went, there actually needs, we need a pan-Canadian education recovery fund. It's going to be billions of dollars that's needed for all of the kinds of staff that are needed in schools. But what we're not seeing now in Ontario, it was distressing to go, great, we don't have to pay for stickers on our license plates anymore. That $1 billion that we lose out of our public money could have a huge impact. Karen's right, bringing up the $1.6 billion we lost by sending everybody, checks for $200. And we really have to be looking and understanding the implications for kids from the early grades all the way up through the end of their high school, because we are supposed to be preparing them for the future. But right now, in Ontario, we are not seeing a coherent, comprehensive vision, plan, understanding of what needs to happen in the short term and the long term.
Heather, I saw you out of the corner of my eye nodding your head when Annie Kidder just said we have an emergency situation as it relates to mental health in the province of Ontario with young people right now. You endorse that?
I do. And I think that in addition to a very multi-sectorial, multi-level plan, we need to think about amassing tools that we can put into place. And there are tools out there that can be used for students to help them gain better resiliency, for parents, for teachers to help make mental health moments when they see them in the classroom, so they're confident and don't worry that they're triggering things. There are programs that we can offer, but we find that they're haphazard at this point. So it's usually at the pleasure of an individual rather than at a school board level or at a system level. So I think this is a small piece of the puzzle, but we have to remember that there are those self-management and self-learning programs out there that could make a difference to building resiliency in students, to building confidence in teachers to deal with mental health materials. A lot of times they don't feel, at least in post-secondary settings, in the secondary school settings I've worked in, they worry that they're going to do something wrong, that they're going to trigger a reaction, that they're not going to be able to answer a question appropriately. Or in some cases, they don't really feel it's a teacher's responsibility to take mental health into consideration and to act as a gatekeeper for students who are in distress, that should be the job of a mental health professional. But I think that there's something that can be done at all levels. And because this is an emergency, I think we have to start thinking in those terms. What can we put into place at every level of the system?
Well, let me follow up on that with Tony. And Tony, I'll circle back with you in as much as a lot of the ideas that people put forward are things that take a long time to implement, quite frankly. It's a big system. What's something that a Minister of Education could make a decision on today that could actually kickstart something soon?
Well, I think they could convene a stakeholders meeting right now and identify what are those areas where students are having clear difficulties: elementary reading, transition to high school, credit accumulation, mental health. And taking that advice, they could add additional staff with some board flexibility, because every board and every school indeed is different. We could also be planning for summer school right now and summer programs right now. Those are things that could be done immediately, but it requires a commitment to bring everyone together.
Let me go to Karen then next. Staffing is something that was just mentioned. I presume in your secondary panel that lack of staff and staff having to book off because they may have COVID or they feel sick, that's a big issue right now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is an issue, and finding the people to come in who are qualified to replace those education professionals, that's becoming really difficult and challenging. It takes money. So Tony's just mentioned it takes time, but it takes money too. The Conference Board of Canada did a study in 2019 that found that for every dollar you spend on education, you get $1.30 back because of the savings to the rest of the system, to the rest of the social network that we have. And we're going to have to take the money and put it into the system so that we have the returns, because the students in Ontario are worth it. I know that might sound cliche, but they are worth it, and we need to make up for the time that they've missed. It's not our fault that they've missed this time or these experiences, but we can play a part. So sure, a Minister of Education can make an announcement to have some funding that will actually put some of these supports in place, but I'll ask again that they be equitable, that it not be money in individual people's pockets, because that is not equitable. We need to be addressing the needs of everyone across the system, and we have a public education system that can help with that.
But I think, Karen, if the minister were here, he would say, we have negotiated with the teacher federations. We have agreements in place to allow retired teachers back into the classroom, to allow the hiring with special money for more substitute teachers in a way that hasn't happened before. That is true, isn't it?
Yes, and now boards are hiring people with high school diplomas to be monitors in a classroom because they're not able to get people. We have a backlog at the College of Teachers, so qualified people don't have their certificate and can't get a permanent job in Ontario. There's a number of things that need to be addressed. Allowing more retirees more time to be in the classroom, well, we've got the data to prove that it made no difference last year, and it's unlikely to make a difference this year. If people don't feel their workplace is safe, they're not going to go in. But I want to put it back to how are we going to support the needs of the students? And it is a whole education team that we need. Hopefully we'll be moving out of this and, we'll have all the protections that we need and we'll be able to move on. But are we doing everything we can right now to help the students? The time is ticking. June is coming fast. Do we want the grade 12s to be moving on to university? I think we've heard some opinions about that. Are they ready? Or should we have something that's open and available, destigmatized, where they can extend their learning and then maybe move ahead when they're feeling more positive about themselves and the education system?
Annie, that's a good question that Karen just raised, and maybe I'll put it to you. Do you think the system is doing everything it possibly can at the moment to ensure ... all of those things that Karen just said?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think that there has been a big enough commitment in terms of the funding that's actually needed to support this. I think that, if we're just going to focus on one group, if we think of the kids that are graduating this year, they've gone through an incredible time for the last 2 years. Are they prepared for many, many things to live in the world? And so I think that, again, we have to address this with incredible urgency. There's already, budgets being planned, but there's also an election coming in Ontario. So everybody's, making their platforms. And it's very sad to see today the platform focusing on license plates rather than on children and young people. And I think that, Tony's right. Bring what can be done right now, bring everybody together, understand where there are real places that we could intervene, which is all those transition points, kids just starting, kids in the transition to high school, kids making sure they have their credits, and for kids leaving high school. And it's not just teachers that are needed, they are needed, but it's all that other support staff, and it's going to cost money. And there has to be a willingness to do that, but it has to be based on good advice. And that's why, and I feel like I've been so boring on this, but we've been saying it since the very beginning of the pandemic. There needs to be an education task force. BC has an education steering committee with health people and all the people from education on it. There are beautiful models in other countries of that, to make sure you're getting real good advice from people on the ground, from academics, from people looking at the research, from students who are in the middle of the experience, from health professionals, from people in post-secondary, because I feel like decisions are being made now based on politics rather than based on what's really needed in schools.
I got 10 seconds left, Annie. Have you had a no to that request, or just a we're thinking about it, or what?
We've had, we do meet with people all the time. That's been the response.
Aha, got it. Well, we meet with people all the time on this program, too, and I'm glad that you five were part of the group that we meet with. We really appreciate your wisdom on this subject today. Kelly Gallagher-Mackay, Tony Pontus, Annie Kidder, Karen Littlewood, Heather Stewart. Thanks, all of you, for coming on to TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The prospect of life on other planets is tantalizing to more than just science fiction fans. For astrophysicist and planetary scientist Sara Seager, what's in the night sky became a life's work. But when tragedy struck her family, it also framed a search for meaning here on Earth. Her recent book, The Smallest Lights in the Universe, a memoir, tells that story. Sara Seager teaches at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and she joins us now from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it's a great pleasure to have you, I will say, back on this program, because you and I first met 10 years ago when you were on this show. So hi again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Not at all. Before we get to the memoir, I do want to start with a recent news development and get your take on that, because last month, after traveling nearly 1 million miles, the James Webb Space Telescope arrived in its new home. And let me start with, what is the importance of this event for you, given what you do for a living?
Well, it's huge. It's basically our next Hubble, but it's way more powerful. And, you know, the Canadians have an instrument on this. Most astronomers around the globe are counting on the Webb telescope to move us to the next level in this entire field of astronomy.
So what does this let you do that the Hubble couldn't do?
Well, for me personally, it lets us study atmospheres of exoplanets, planets orbiting stars other than the sun, in way more detail than ever before. That's what it will enable.
I'm going to throw a couple of nicknames at you here, because I know you've heard this before. The astronomical Indiana Jones. I've seen you referred to that way. Okay, what's the Ark of the Covenant, in which case, if I can torture the metaphor a little further, that you are looking for?
Well, the Ark of the Covenant we're looking for is another planet that has the right conditions for life, that we may even see signs of life on.
And, you know, you're extraordinarily, I know you get this question all the time, but you seem to be extraordinarily hopeful that that's going to happen in your lifetime. How come?
Well, I'm going to have to revise that in a moment, but how come? Because we know there are exoplanets out there. Planets are incredibly common. It appears that, you know, every star has planets. Rocky worlds of the kind, you know, rocky worlds are very common as well. And as we put new sophisticated telescopes in the sky, we can take it a step further. So, you know, the ingredients for life are everywhere we look in astronomy. And as long as we have a planet with water, there's really no reason why life shouldn't start there.
And the distinction between a planet and an exoplanet is what?
Well, an exoplanet is a subset of a planet. A planet is something in our own solar system: Mercury, Venus, even Earth, Mars, that orbits our sun. But, you know, we usually forget this, but every star in the sky is a sun. And each of those suns also have planets. And we call them exoplanets.
Gotcha. Okay, let's go back. We're going to look into your memoir now, and I want to take you back to the time when you were 10 years old. And it's a starry, starry night in central Ontario, eastern Ontario. You're at Bon Echo Provincial Park, a place you love, a place I went to summer camp at, my dad went to summer camp at. And you look up in the sky and you see the stars. And apparently it was a life-changing moment. How?
It was, even if at the time I didn't realize, but I was a city kid. You know, I grew up in the inner city in the South Annex. And I didn't know about stars, you know, only through books or remember the McLaughlin Planetarium.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got a chance to go out there with my dad and a babysitter and my siblings, I don't know why, what possessed me to walk out in the middle of the night. And I must have been so lucky because it was a moonless night. There were no clouds. And I looked up literally for the first time ever. And wow, there were so many stars. I just, you know, I almost stopped breathing because I just didn't imagine that such a magnificent vista existed.
Let's do an excerpt from the book here. Why stars instead of horses or boys or hockey, you write? I don't know. Maybe it's because the stars are the antithesis of darkness. Stars are light. Stars are possibility. They are the places where science and magic meet. Windows to the worlds greater than my own. Stars gave me the hope that I might one day find the right answers. When I think of the stars, I feel an almost physical pull. I don't just want to look at them, I want to know them, every last one of them, a star for every grain of sand on Earth. I want to bask in the hundreds of millions of suns that shine in the thousands of billions of skies in our galaxy alone. Stars represent more than possibility to me, they are probability. On Earth, the odds could seem stacked against me, but where you are changes everything. Each star was, and still is, another chance for me to find myself somewhere else, somewhere new. First of all, that's beautifully written. Well done. Second of all, what do you think Like, you're 10 years old. What was the something else at age 10 you thought you were looking for at the time?
Well, of course, we never really know about, especially when we're kids and our life is so limited. My life was pretty negative at the time, I'd say. The South Annex was, I think it's all gentrified now, but it was not a very nice place. My parents were divorced. Like, I had in my personal opinion, a very evil stepfather at home. So something else was just something better, something mysterious, just something, for lack of a better word, grand. I mean, something mysterious and big. Just like the possibility that there's more to life than your everyday mediocre existence, although I'm sure I couldn't articulate that at the time.
Right. If I say sour cream and onion chips to you, what does that evoke?
Well, there's a story in the book of what it evokes, is that when I was a little kid, before my parents were divorced, we went to a Montessori school in Richmond Hill. And to get there, and when my parents got divorced and my mother moved to the inner city, we still went to that school for a couple of years, even though it was so far away. And I don't know if people would do this today, but my brother being 7 or 8 years old, me a year younger, sister a couple of years younger, we would take the subway all the way from, think of the Wellesley subway station in Toronto, all the way to Finch, and then we had to take a go bus. And so on the subway, my brother would always try to save money, and once in a while, buy us some sour cream and onion chips. And it was like the best thing ever.
You were 15, you make plans to go skating with some buddies. You cancel your plans. Instead, you decide to go to a lecture at the University of Toronto. Different fork in the road. What happened as a result?
Well, let's talk about what happened leading up to that. There was an amazing event happen. A star exploded, a big, huge explosion called a supernova. And it wasn't like an explosion that did anything to us here on Earth, but an astronomer from the University of Toronto who was working in Chile on the mountain, he noticed a star where there wasn't one before. Like, imagine that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually. It really struck me because all these stars, they're so far away. It's not like turning on a light bulb in your house and someone outside notices something's different. It's like major, major amounts of energy have to be put out there. So the fact that someone could see that and there was something new and it was being celebrated in a way that I'd never seen science celebrated before. So I went to Convocation Hall. This is a hall that holds like 2,000 people, and it was packed. And there were like a lot of people giving speeches, and it really struck me about making discoveries and the joy of the night sky. It stayed with me.
Changed your life.
It did. After that, I became an astronomer, like as a hobby, even though I was only 15.
You went to Jarvis Collegiate. It's a very well-known school in downtown Toronto. And you write it was the perfect school at which to be a loner, which is how you described yourself. How come?
Well, I was one of those kids, first of all, who never fit in. Later, I realized, like as an adult, I was one of those late people who got diagnosed with autism. But at the time, I was super, super awkward. And one of the things at that school is it didn't seem to matter because there wasn't like, movies, there's like the popular kids or the football team and the cheerleaders. I don't think we had a football team or cheerleaders, but there wasn't really anything like that. People could kind of keep to themselves. There were so many immigrants. Kids would show up from all over the world and not speak English for a few months until they learned. And so there was really, you could sort of just be yourself and keep to yourself and still get a great education.
Now, since you raised the issue of your diagnosis of autism, let me follow up on that because, of course, I suspect the vast, vast majority of people who get that diagnosis are kids when it happens. How old were you?
Well, I was in my 40s, but it's not so true. Like what you're saying is maybe today, the vast majority are kids. But back then, when I was a kid, when you were a kid, they didn't have all these labels. Like they didn't identify, like think of all the kids who had ADD in your class when you were growing up, right? They probably got in trouble, but they weren't. They were just energetic and couldn't focus. So we didn't have we didn't have dyslexia. People never identified dyslexia. So it's not just autism or dyslexia. It's like tons of things that kids today will get identified with. So I just want you to know, everyone out there, there's so many people this age of 40s, 50s, who look back, they realize they have autism or Asperger's, it's all called the same thing now, and they can get diagnosed or often self-identify looking back. So it is quite common to get diagnosed at this age for people of this generation. When
somebody suggested it to you, though, you didn't exactly welcome the diagnosis, fair to say?
Well, I just thought it was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Like, don't you feel like you know yourself pretty well? It's like that. Like, how could this be true? How could I have some, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are definitely on the spectrum. And sometimes I used to tease them or, like in my own mind, make fun of them. So it's really funny, like ironic in a way. And I just said, no, there's just no way this is possible.
But apparently it is possible, and you came to accept the diagnosis. And how has that helped you better understand your sense of otherness over the previous 4 decades of your life?
Well, it explained a lot, and that was all good. But it's mostly helped me now because with relationships with other people, like we can get into my husband, Charles, later, but even my students, all the people around me, like I now understand why the world moves so slowly for me. My view is like I can talk super fast and be really abrupt and people get really upset, or I can slow down and translate my way of thinking to the way I talk to other people. And it results in people being less upset with me. So that's a good thing. And there's a lot of this back and forth. Like some of the people I mentor, they're like, well, why do I have to adapt to the rest of the world? And it's like, well, if you're the minority, usually you have to adapt. So there's this whole thing. It's as if I want you to imagine for a moment, you only speak a different language and you only think in your native language, but you have to translate everything to English. And when people speak, you've got to translate it all back. So now I do that. And it made my life easier in the way I interact with other people.
Have you asked yourself whether or not you would be who you are, namely one of the world's foremost astrophysicists, had you not been on the spectrum?
I'm grateful to have autism because it enabled me to be where I am. There's like this intensive focus and just an interest in something to the exclusion of almost everything else. And those two things have allowed me to be a great scientist.
You are looking for planets out there that are the most similar to Earth, in which case they need to have what kinds of qualities?
Well, we so far think they need to have a rocky surface like our Earth and not be a giant planet like Jupiter that has no surface as we know it. We think we need the right we know we need the right temperature so we can have complex molecules that life requires. And there needs to be some kind of liquid, such as water, where chemical reactions can happen to make life occur. So it's really those three things: temperature, rocky surface, water, or some kind of liquid.
When I used to watch Star Trek, we called those Class M planets. Is that basically what you're looking for?
Basically, but they're not called that in real life.
No, that was on TV.
I know.
Having said that, can habitability out there look very different from habitability here?
We want to keep an open mind because it might. For example, even in our own solar system, Jupiter has icy moons that have no atmosphere. They have an icy surface, but beneath that surface, there's water actually. So there could be life swimming around beneath these icy crusts. For exoplanets, the most common type of star out there is very different from our own sun. It's a small, cool, red dwarf star that give off giant repeated flares. So we really don't know yet. We're trying to keep an open mind.
Do you imagine a time, though, when the notion of seeing another planet out there that is habitable for beings like us would be so appealing to so many people that people will want to leave Earth to settle that planet?
Well, want and can are two very different things, right? So there's no doubt in my mind that people will want to go to another planet. Think of even the movies we have. It's not just Star Trek, right? But every couple of years, there's a new movie because people love this idea of being able to travel to another world. It's not in the cards for us now just because the stars are so far away. Any planet orbiting another star is literally many, many trillions of miles away.
Okay, Sara, I want to take you to what is the most heartbreaking part of your book. Your book is extraordinary, and you don't spare a lot of detail in talking about the most awful thing that ever happened to you in your life, which is, of course, the death of your first love, your husband, who died at the age of 40. Pancreatic cancer. You're left alone with 2 little kids, 2 sons. And, well, let's start here. I'm sure there was a point at which you asked yourself, can I continue to have the career that I want to have and yet be the mother that I need to be to these two fatherless boys. How did you negotiate all that in your head?
It was really tough, actually. Actually, I was 40, he was 47. And just for the record, my dad had just died, who was also the anchor of my world, of pancreatic cancer. And then my first husband, he had a different kind of cancer, but the whole thing is just a disaster no matter how you look at it. I just remember one day just being exhausted. It's like, you know, those 10-minute tasks, they fill up many hours. So I'd be at work all day, then I'd go home and do all the 10-minute tasks. And there were the kids who I wanted to spend more time with, not just physical time, but like my mind was always all over the place. It was just juggling so much. And honestly, I just felt like quitting my job. I was just like, I just don't know if I can keep it all together right now. And I had some friends at the time, my widow friends, and I told them, and you know what I expected them to just say? Look, pick up your socks. Everyone has tough problems. Just get over it. But the funniest thing was they didn't say that. They just said, we support you. You can do great at whatever you want. And so I was really lost for a while.
But you figured it out.
I did figure it out. I did figure it out. I had a lot of people help. I had women, different women at different times, fantastic, now remaining very close family friends, like live at my house in exchange for helping with the kids. You know, I had a housekeeper come a lot. It was a hard few years, but I made it.
Because you're a person of science, I can ask you this question, and that is, what would you put the odds at that a woman from...
I should work that out. I've got to work that out now that you've asked me.
Well, no, hang on. This is on something else. What would you put the odds at on a woman who's from Toronto and makes her living in Boston and lives in Concord, Massachusetts, would find the second love of her life in Thunder Bay, Ontario?
Oh, right. That would be really zero, I would say. I'd put the odds at zero.
Well, it can't be zero because that's what happened to you.
I was on my way to give a talk, to be like a keynote speaker at a weekend-long event run by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. This is a very old, established astronomy organization with chapters all across the country. And I'd gotten my start. Remember when I was 15 and I got interested in astronomy, I joined that organization. And like I went to their meetings in Toronto. And now being so grown up and being an astronomer for my job, it was like an honor for me to be able to go back and talk to them. Now, this meeting in Thunder Bay was a general assembly. So it was open to all the people in all the chapters. Not everyone goes, of course, but like the leadership from each chapter would go and members nearby. And so yeah, it was run out of Thunder Bay. So I was on my way to Thunder Bay. And on the plane, I was like, you know, kind of second guessing while I was going, because even though all I've said, it was the long weekend, they hold it over the long weekend in July. I remember I have kids at home, so I had to get my babysitter / family friend to like stay over on the long weekend. So I was on my way there. And then when I got there, I was hosted by a widow. She took me to the opening event and I was there at the reception and it was like the movies. I looked across the room. I saw this tall, dark, handsome man. I was just like, wow, who is that man? I have to meet him. And as the weekend went by, like I wasn't meeting him. You know, it was my job to like talk to all the astronomers and hear about all their telescopes. But finally I was able to bump into him and we had lunch together. And all I could do was think, wow, I finally get to meet this guy.
How long does it take though before you stop feeling guilty about the fact that Mike is no longer here and start feeling positive that you can get your life back on track with another person?
Well, it's not so much guilt. You know, I think every widow or widower has a different path. It wasn't so much guilt. I never felt guilty about this because, you know, if it was reversed, I would have wanted him. I would have like insisted for him to get remarried. You know, a lot of people feel very strongly about that, but it was the sadness. You know, the sadness doesn't go away. Like just because I met Charles and got married, that sadness and missing my first husband, Mike, it lasted a very, very long time. You know, it still pops up. Like I'm definitely healed and whatever word you want to use. But it was many, many years before I was able to, I don't know, I guess for lack of a better word, fully let go.
You got a MacArthur Fellowship grant. I guess, what do they call those? The Genius Grants or something?
Right.
Okay. And the Globe and Mail calls you for an interview and they ask you why you left Canada. You're from Canada originally, obviously. You've gone down to the States. And they asked you, why do you feel you have to go to the States? And your answer was, because America is better at fostering greatness. Tell us why Canada is less good at fostering greatness.
Okay, well, I've definitely had time to think about this, and I won't call it fostering greatness per se. I mean, we have Wayne Gretzky after all, right? Like we were able to generate a Wayne Gretzky and many amazing hockey players. And let's ask ourselves, can we in Canada generate other greatness in that way, right? Or, is our culture kind of wanting to make sure that equality dominates over any one individual being singled out for any reason? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
So like when I was growing up, I wasn't like, okay, I'm not bragging here. I just was so smart. I was like way smarter than anyone else. And I was also way bad at so many things. Okay. So why was I allowed to be called like really bad at sports? But I wasn't allowed to be like, okay, this kid is really smart. What can we do for this kid? If I was a great ice hockey player, I'm pretty sure I would have been put into some program and had that like amplified.
Gotcha.
And it's not just Canada. Of course, this happens in the US. It happens everywhere. Some things are recognized and fostered and other things aren't. But if I had to sort of put it all together like that, in America, there's this, it is a bit distasteful, of course, right? It's like me. I need to just self-promote, get myself ahead, right? But, with everything, there's two sides to every coin, right? So part of this culture here in the US, it pushes that forward. It amplifies things, some bad things, some great things.
Well, let me pick up on that. I don't dispute the comment. I think it's, it's empirically provably true. Having said that, you now live in a country where half the people seem to hate the other half of the people with a level of vehemence that we haven't seen maybe since the days of Vietnam. Some people are suggesting not since 1860. What do you think about that?
It's like traumatic for everyone involved, I would say. And, it was probably there for a very long time, right? It's just now being allowed to kind of come out and really cause a lot of trouble. And it makes me incredibly uneasy. And I'd say most people.
Now
it's a very, very tough thing.
Yeah, you're so ensconced right now in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Do you ever imagine things becoming so disruptive, so violent, so frightening in the United States that you feel you might have to leave?
Definitely. I mean, the thought of returning to Canada permanently is always with me. I'll just put it that way.
Okay. Let's finish up on this, Sara, because I do love your answer to the question which you get asked all the time, which is, do you think we're alone in the universe? And your answer is, do the math. What does that mean?
Well, the math means that, when we look in the night sky, depending on where you lived, you can see 10 or hundreds or maybe a few thousand stars. But in our Milky Way galaxy, there are actually hundreds of billions of stars, a number that's so huge we can barely contemplate it. But in our universe, we actually have hundreds of billions of galaxies. So if you think of hundreds of billions of stars in each of the hundreds of billions of galaxies, and if most stars have planets and rocky planets are common, then the chance for life starting on any planet out there, it's just so huge. That's what do the math means, is just think of the endless number of stars and planets and the possibilities in the universe.
It's hard to imagine it's just us out there, right?
It is hard. It's very hard to imagine it's just us. Right now, we won't be able to meet life or discover it unless it's actually right up close to us, right around a nearby star. So there is life out there somewhere, I'm convinced of that. But whether we can find and identify it anytime soon, we have to get lucky. Nature would have to have given us life somewhere very near to us.
How depressed will you be if you spend your entire life looking for this and don't find it?
Well, I think everyone, when we get to a certain age, we do realize that our goal might not be something we can meet. So in that case, I have to be satisfied with all the discoveries I have made and that this is a generational project. So if it's not me, it'll be someone in the next generation. And I'm training those people. Okay, if it's not me, it can be someone that I've trained that I'm helping to be able to make it happen someday.
That would be cool, but it'd be better if it were you, right?
Well, I'd love to be the one who makes the big discovery. And we just have to be lucky, we have to be able to find life around a nearby star, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
In which case, Sara Seager, I wish you luck.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
The Smallest Lights in the Universe is Sara Seager's extraordinary book. We are happy to put it on our bookshelf here in the studio. and hope others will as well. Take care, Sara, and thank you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, February 8th, 2022. Tomorrow, how Omicron made a bad situation in Ontario prisons even tougher. Also, we'll find out about a campaign to stop Canada from detaining immigrants and refugees in provincial prisons. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.